I really had no intention of being a commercial lawyer.
What single element would you want to change about the legal industry today?
Oh my God, did I just do that? It is the most important thing. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter how good you are on the other things.
Do you think that consumers are adequately protected while using FinTech services?
I can only imagine the kinds of personal challenges that you would have been going through at that time. Welcome to File Notes, the limited series where we interview the best legal professionals in the world. I'm your co-host, Luke Campbell, and this is episode number 1, proudly brought to you by VXT. Today, Ella and I are interviewing Jeremy Muir, partner at Minter Ellison Rudd Watts. Jeremy is widely recognised as New Zealand's foremost lawyer in crypto with broader expertise across financial services, fintech and investments. Jeremy co-leads the firm's banking and financial services division, is in the Legal 500 Asia Pacific's Hall of Fame for investment funds, and is ranked in the top tier for financial services by the Chambers Asia Pacific. In today's conversation, we discuss everything from Jeremy's early career, overcoming difficult personal challenges, becoming a partner at one of New Zealand's largest law firms, and the practical steps that have been important to his success. Awesome. Well, it's really cool to be recording this episode of File Notes with you, Jeremy. Excited to talk about your career and your current practice at Minter Ellison Rudd Watts. One of the reasons I was particularly excited to talk to you today was because we met, I think it was about 2 years ago, at the Chatham House when you were talking there about Sharesies, financial services, how to move fast and basically obey the law, which was an exciting topic for someone who had not too long ago started their own startup. Yeah, it's really good to see you again and excited to chat today.
Absolutely, and I'm glad to be here. Luke, you guys are doing some great stuff, so happy to talk.
Awesome. So, first question really, why law? Could you talk us through the beginning of your career and what got you interested in law in the first place?
Yeah, why law? The first thing to say is that I didn't necessarily think I was going to be a lawyer, yet here I am. So I came out of school, Kapiti College, went to Auckland University. I'd done lots of debating, theatre things at school, as well as obviously English, history, those sort of papers. So law was quite a natural subject to study, and I'd just done a short exchange, AFS exchange in France as well. So I signed up for a BA, Bachelor of Arts, and a law degree conjoint at Auckland. My BA, I went through doing English, history, French, or French major ultimately. And law, I enjoyed, particularly as I got further into it, but I was focused on doing things like international law and immigration and refugee law, various things other than commercial law at that point. I fell into it, certainly no lawyers in the family. I didn't know any lawyers. First generation to go to university. Yeah, that's kind of where I ended up.
When you were involved in debating, had you ever received comments from people like, oh, you're so good at arguing, you should become a lawyer? Had people ever said things like that to you?
Yeah, I think it's a long time ago. My memory's not that good, but I assume people must have said along the way, you should do law. But I really probably had very little understanding of exactly what that would be like or what kind of job that might lead to. I think as I went into sort of first couple of years of university, I'd heard about the foreign affairs or becoming a diplomat to use my French language skills and a bit of law stuff as well. Or maybe if I was going to be a lawyer, then I'd obviously be a courtroom lawyer, because that's where you got to debate and do things.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about some of the, extracurricular activities you were involved in, like debating and theatre. In hindsight, thinking back to the things you did outside of class, outside of direct learning in school, what do you think helped you in your career in terms of the things that you were interested in?
Really what I've found, and the reason, to skip ahead in the story, the reason that I'm still a lawyer today and practicing in commercial law and have been working at the same law firm back in New Zealand, certainly for the whole time, is just finding things that are interesting. So the extracurricular things that I did at school were really about following paths of curiosity, things that I enjoyed, things that I wanted to do rather than feeling obliged or that I was just turning up and punching the clock. I was passionate about doing school productions, or I really enjoyed getting into the nitty-gritty of debating and making jokes and trying to structure arguments, all of those sort of things. So I think rather than clearly I learned some skills of sort of rational thought and putting ideas together and being creative, which I think is really important for a lawyer. But I think the key thing was just being able to keep myself interested by following curiosity.
Yeah. And thinking back to that time, you graduated high school, you're studying law, like who was like Jeremy Muir at that time? Were you really outgoing and partying a lot? What did that look like?
There's a real sort of period of self-discovery at university, which is kind of what it's for, isn't it? In the sense that when I went to university, I didn't necessarily do all of the same things that I did at high school. I think I nearly went along to join the debating club at Auckland University, but for some reason didn't get there that night, so didn't actually end up doing debating through university. So I did other things. I wasn't as active in extracurricular stuff, but I met a lot of people. I stayed in a hostel. I flattered. I learnt just a bit more about myself and interpersonal relationships. I worked part-time mostly in a hotel. So I evolved. I learnt a lot about how I learnt as well. Certainly at law school, if there was an award going for person most likely to be asleep in any particular given lecture, I would definitely have won that. A lot of people will, if I say when I was at law school, they'll go, oh, I was there at that time, but I don't quite remember you. And I would go, oh, but do you remember? How about from this angle? Like, oh, yes, back row, yes. And from that I learnt that I'm not very good at sitting in a large room full of people being talked to for an hour. I just tend to fall asleep. I learned by reading stuff and attacking it with a yellow highlighter, not in actual books, just in printouts, and basically absorbing ideas that way, or in small groups. I was better in tutorials, and actually I went on after I'd graduated, and while I was working I did an LLM Masters part-time at Auckland University as well, which I absolutely loved because suddenly I was in rooms with 5 or 6 people throwing ideas around and talking. I definitely learnt a lot more about who I was as a person, how I absorbed information, and that certainly fed into the lawyer I became.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would relate to that, being better learners in those small groups where you can have active discussions, and when there's something that you disagree with or a question that comes up in your mind, you can raise it and make it an open discussion with some people and work through it together. So definitely.
Yep.
You mentioned, so when you finished university, you then did your LLM. So what was the transition from doing your bachelor's to then working and studying at the same time? Like, how did that go for you?
Yeah, and again, as I was going through doing all of these international law papers and French papers and various other things, I certainly hadn't envisaged a career in commercial law. I didn't know any commercial lawyers. I couldn't have named any commercial law firms, but I did the summer clerking program. I did the round of applications that most law students in New Zealand would do. I got 8 interviews with big law firms and organisations around town. I'd even cut off my ponytail by that stage. That's how serious I was. I went and I did my 8 interviews and then went and sat at home waiting for the responses, and I got 1 letter back offering me a summer clerk job with Rudd Watson Stone, and I'm still there, so I seized my opportunity clearly. So that's what I did. I summer clerked. I was offered a law clerk job at the end of that. Came back to Rudd Watson Stone, which is now obviously Minter Ellison Rudd Watts, and really then just started to get interested in what I was doing. I actually started as a commercial property lawyer and with a rotation in the corporate team at that point. But I was also, felt I had some unfinished business with university, as I still do. So I went and signed up for an LLM, which I did part-time whilst working full-time. I started my second year full-time work, and I did it over 2 years, just leaving the office to go to lectures and writing papers and things outside of office hours. And that kept me busy, distracted me possibly from the more mundane aspects of being a junior lawyer. And it was also partly, I think, because of being engaged in a commercial law firm, but not having done a great deal of commercial law in my degree. Part of me was no doubt thinking, maybe I should do some more commercial law papers. So that was really the focus of my LLM, was agency law, sort of corporate institutions, those sort of things. It also led me later, actually, when I was working overseas, I did part-time study through the University of London, diploma in economics as well, because I thought, and I never studied business or commerce, so maybe I should do some of that. And demonstrating my ignorance, I studied economics, which is entirely not business or commerce, but was fascinating. The rest of the business and commerce I've had to learn on the job.
You mentioned working overseas. Early on in your career, you left New Zealand and you were admitted to the bar and worked in both Guernsey and the Cayman Islands. From an outsider like me, they seem like really weird places to go to. What drew you to those?
Yeah, I left New Zealand at the end of, I think, my third year of full-time work, before I'd got to the end of 4 years. So I possibly had done more of a stint here than some people might do these days. But I was certainly looking to go overseas, and I was married at that point. Catherine, my wife, was doing her doctorate in French, obviously having met through the French department at Auckland University. And we were looking for something interesting to do. We could have gone to London, but the firm that I went to work for in Guernsey actually came and did a sort of a tour of Australia and New Zealand, looking to hire a bunch of young lawyers in one go, because they were on a rapid expansion course. Because at that time, the offshore legal world, and by that the sort of community of offshore finance centres like Guernsey, Jersey, the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, the Isle of Man, Bermuda, which are all very active financial centres. So they're places to domicile vehicles where you have multinational structures. And certainly for investment funds, which is what I ended up doing, you domicile your fund in an offshore jurisdiction because you have investors all around the world and you make investments all around the world. So you want to put the fund itself in a sort of a low complexity jurisdiction where you don't have another layer of tax or regulation on top of all of the complexity of just dealing with these global structures. So that's what this firm was doing, and at that time the offshore legal world really had a lot of law firms that were only in one place. So there were no Guernsey firms in Jersey, there were no Cayman firms in the BVI. And the firm that I went to work for, which is now called Auger, or Augier, depending on whether you're in Guernsey or Jersey, had been a Jersey firm, originally Auger and Le Cornu, Auger and Le Masurier, and it had opened an office in Guernsey, which was terribly groundbreaking at the time. They also then went on to do the first transatlantic merger with a Cayman law firm and cross jurisdictions. And now in that offshore world, there are sort of 7 or 8, a magic circle, if you like, of big offshore firms who are in multiple jurisdictions, up to 10 or 12 jurisdictions. But at the time, this was a first. So that firm wanted to hire a bunch of Kiwis and Australians because they'd had a couple of people who had fished up in Jersey and Guernsey who they quite liked. They thought were practical, hard-working lawyers, as most overseas jurisdictions tend to find us, trained, capable of turning our hand to anything. So they made a splashy ad in the local legal newspaper offering offshore finance centre jobs at quite high rates of sterling salaries. And I went along to an evening where they played a cheesy video of the Channel Islands and said that they were looking to hire a lot of people. And quite amusingly, I walked into the room and found that there were 4 or 5 other people from my firm there at the same time, and we all looked at each other and were a bit sheepish about finding ourselves in the same room. And they eventually hired pretty much all of us as well, so that was quite a blow for the firm, but we were all in different teams. So the reason it appealed was obviously Guernsey. Maybe not obviously if you don't know the history. Guernsey and Jersey, which are separate jurisdictions called Crown dependencies, and that they're part of the British Isles but not part of the United Kingdom, so they have their own parliaments, can pass their own laws, have set their own tax rates, all of those things. But Guernsey and Jersey are literally just off the French coast. They sit in the Gulf of Normandy, between Normandy and Brittany. So although they are quite British and they speak English pretty much predominantly these days, they have a lot of French history, they have French influence on their legal system, and it just seemed like a fascinating place. Plus, Catherine was still doing her doctorate, which involved trips to Paris to read manuscripts in the French National Library, so it seemed an island off the coast of France would be a convenient jumping off point. Overall, we thought it was a bit of an adventure.
And were there practical difficulties for you? Obviously, getting admitted in a different jurisdiction, was that difficult?
So I'd already been admitted in New Zealand, obviously, done my professionals course, been admitted as a barrister and solicitor, done all of that. In Guernsey, it was very hard to get admitted as what they call an advocate of the Royal Court of Guernsey, because the Royal Court is the oldest continuously functioning court in Europe, so it has a lot of history. And the advocates are the people with rights to appear in the court. They get to wear robes and French-style toque hats, which are like a black chef's hat, but not quite as high. More like what a minor ecclesiastical official in a French parish might wear or something. They look very smart, though. But it was quite hard to do that, and I'll tell you the steps I had to take. But it wasn't hard to go and work there. And the commercial law and the investment funds law, which is what I was doing, there it's all in English, it's modern statute-based law. Because they're small jurisdictions, there isn't a lot of case law. In order to actually be admitted there, I had to first be admitted as either a barrister or a solicitor in England, which involves doing, for a New Zealand lawyer, qualified lawyer transfer test. So that was very straightforward and filing a few papers. So I'm a qualified English solicitor, even though I've never worked in England, but I had to do that. Had to have 3 years residency, had to have at least 1 year's pupillage, so working in a local law firm. Had to sit a set of bar exams that most people took months off to study for because they were very hard to study for because there aren't that many textbooks. So that was on local succession law, criminal law, all of the things that you would have to study in another jurisdiction. So that was quite onerous. And then on top of that, the most fun part was, because the Guernsey legal system is part French in its origins, because the Channel Islands are the last remnant of the Duchy of Normandy, so the legal system, if you go back far enough, is Old French customary law, written in Old French books from that period. Now, mostly you don't have to deal with that if you're doing day-to-day commercial law, but if you actually went off-piste a bit into land law or succession law or trust, sort of some aspects of property law, you were suddenly in this sort of old French law. So in order to ensure that you had a basis for this to be admitted to the bar, you actually had to go and do a 3-month course called a Certificat d'études juridiques normandes et françaises, a certificate in Norman and French law studies at the University of Caen, Caen, in Normandy, which was taught in French and was quite hilarious fun, particularly because most of the people doing that particular course mostly don't speak that much French. I was lucky because I at least had a BA in French at that time. So that was, getting admitted in Guernsey was a task, but it was great fun. And in the end, I got to have a ceremony where, literally, because so few people are admitted every year, in the ceremony, the presiding judge of the Royal Court gives a little speech about each candidate who's admitted. So that was hilarious. But because it actually took so long, I was actually admitted only after I had left. So I've certainly never appeared in the courts using that practice. But I do have the hat, which was specially made for me by a special hat and legal garments shop in Paris near Notre Dame.
Wow.
It's the
That is
best
the
bit
best
then.
bit. I should have bought the hat, maybe next time.
Of course. You can send us a
I
photo.
can. Cayman, on the other hand, was completely different. So I turned up in the Cayman Islands after I'd finished working in Guernsey, and literally on about my second day, we filed a couple of papers saying that I was admitted in New Zealand. I think I'd had some issues in that I had to get a practicing certificate in New Zealand, even though I hadn't practiced in New Zealand for several years, which actually took a bit of persuading the Law Society to give me one, but I did, and then I could get admitted in Cayman. And then literally I was whisked into a courtroom in front of a judge who said several words, and suddenly I'm also an admitted attorney at law of the Cayman Islands. So that was a much quicker affair, which was good because I only ended up spending about 3 months in Cayman.
Did you come to New Zealand back after you finished those 3 months?
Yeah, so I had finished in Guernsey, then I had gone and done my 3 months studying in France. Then I had come home to New Zealand for a couple of months just to see family and things. Then we had gone to Cayman and intending to be there for some number of years. But we arrived there just after Hurricane Ivan had been through, which was a Category 5 hurricane. It had done a lot of damage. The place was really quite a mess. Had arrived. We'd had 2 children in Guernsey, so we had 2 girls under the age of 3, and Cayman really wasn't the best place for them. So we made a pretty rapid decision to, although the work was fascinating and I could have quite happily stayed there working, we made the decision to come back to New Zealand. So that was 2005.
Yeah, it's a really common story. Kiwis traveling overseas early in their careers, and as they start to build a family, ending up coming home to raise them here in New Zealand. That sounds like an interesting ride. So how long were you living and working overseas for?
I was away for about 4.5 years. Then came back, called up my old firm. Obviously, I was doing very different things by that stage, but I had an amazing call with some lawyers there who said, "Oh, what you've been doing sounds fascinating. We should try and help you build a funds practice for our firm in New Zealand." Or, "It sounds great. We remember you. We'd definitely have you back. That sounds good." Back I came to Minter Ellison Rudd Watts, originally at that point into the corporate team. And then a couple of years later, we launched a dedicated financial services practice when we hired Lloyd Kavanagh as the initial partner. I was still a senior associate. I came back as a senior associate at that point. And then a couple of years after that, I became the second partner in that practice area.
Today, you're a partner at Minter Ellison Rudd Watts. Was this always a goal that was in the back of your mind when you started practicing law? And what did your journey into partnership look like after you returned to New Zealand?
Apart from having decided on a whim to apply for summer clerkships, I really had no intention of being a commercial lawyer. And it was really just once I got into it and started to find areas that I enjoyed and gradually became more passionate about that it became a career, effectively. And over time at that point, as a lawyer, you eventually start thinking, what kind of lawyer do I want to be and what's the next job that I can have? And if you're a private practice senior associate type level lawyer, you have a number of choices. You can leave the law and do something else completely. So I had a colleague who worked in Guernsey as well and then came back to New Zealand and then eventually decided that she didn't want to be a lawyer at all at that point and retrained and is now a very happy primary school teacher. I was, on the other hand, still enjoying the law. So at that point you have decisions as to whether you might become a partner or you might go and work in-house for a corporate or a bank or something like that, or you might do something else completely. And I was encouraged by the firm to think about my options, and I had just caught the bug a little around building a network, building a practice area, felt that there was a real market for the things that I wanted to do, which at that point was largely around investment funds. So around 2008, for example, up to that point, New Zealand investment funds was a sort of a fairly moribund area. There really wasn't a lot of activity, and there certainly were only a small number of maybe 4 or 5 specialist lawyers in that area across the country, because it was pre-KiwiSaver, it was pre-PI funds regime, and which portfolio investment entities, and effectively investing in funds was less tax efficient for you than going and buying shares yourself, like way less. So funds were not doing that well, they were just scraping along. But bringing in KiwiSaver, changing those regimes, suddenly brought a sort of a burst of energy into that area, and we could actually target this. We could see the opportunity, and we were quite strategic about building a practice area. We identified targets, we decided what we were going to do, we planned an approach to thought leadership, how we would deal with things like sending out news alerts. We took an approach where, rather than other firms might publish some well thought out piece of work a month after something had happened, and we said, no, let's put something out. As soon as something happens, we'll put something short out the same day. We were quite strategic about trying to build the area. And as we were successful and got a number of clients in that space, then there was room for a second partner, so I could come through as an internal candidate. And by that stage, I was keen to have a different job. And partner of a law firm is a different job from, you are effectively becoming an owner of the business, and you have a lot more autonomy around how you spend your time, what your priorities are, whilst also having the responsibility of employing staff and actually running the business. Although in a big firm, that's also, you have a management team that you work with as well. So I was keen for that challenge, and luckily had the opportunity to do so internally, which is not always the case.
Did you have to make many personal sacrifices at that time to get to that role and take on more responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, it was a difficult time. And the other part of the story is that around that time, so 2008, we had a third child, who's our son William, who unfortunately was diagnosed at 14 weeks with a brain tumour and other associated issues with that. For the next 5.5 years, he passed away in 2014. We actually had a full-time sort of sick child who went through rounds of chemotherapy, surgery and operations, and also was a very hands-on kid because he had developmental delays and things as well, but was just the most lovely, active kid. So that was the drama that was going on in our personal lives as well. Very fortunately for me and for our family, Catherine, my wife, was able to commit herself effectively full-time to looking after both William and our other 2 daughters, and our subsequent further son, Louis, after that, which bluntly, it worked for us. She had finished her doctorate but had decided that she wasn't keen to work in French academia, and with a French PhD, she wasn't automatically driven in the midst of another career that she was passionate about. So it worked for us to have that set up where she could support the family whilst I was able to also work a full-time job. But I certainly spent a lot of time looking at documents whilst up at Starship Hospital with Will over that period. Yeah, there were sacrifices, and it was a very busy time, but I was well supported by Minters, incredibly, and that also affected the timing of my partnership. It might have been slightly earlier if we hadn't been dealing with that, but actually Minters was keen to make sure it happened at the right time for me, and that's the way it turned out. So I became a partner in 2011, and that also in its way helped because, as I said, at that point you have more autonomy over the way you structure your day and your times. We were able to work through those things as well.
That's an incredible story, and it sounds like I can only imagine the kinds of personal challenges that you would have been going through at that time.
Yeah, and also these challenges, if you approach them the right way, they are uplifting. And we always felt that we were lucky to have Will with us for the period that we did, because he was not diagnosed with, it was not something that we were ever promised was going to be fixed. So actually, we had him for a longer period of time than we expected, and got a lot of joy out of that time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think everyone goes through personal challenges.
That's another thing you find when you go through it yourself.
It's something that I think we all have to go through and respond to in our own ways. But I think your story really highlights how valuable and important it is to be surrounded by not only, people in your professional life with Minter Ellis and Rod Watts, but also people in your personal life that can help lift you up and support you in those circumstances.
Absolutely.
Maybe circling back a little bit to you've become a partner. Are there any kind of practical steps that you thought were really important to working towards that partnership? You're building this practice area, and a lot of the points that you mentioned to me sounded more like you're building a business and thinking about revenue and customers.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. There are many kinds of lawyers that you can be, but if you want to be a lawyer working in a large commercial firm, which is really the only story I have to tell, so I don't wish to speak for any other context, but it is a business, and particularly where you're in a highly leveraged environment where you have a number of younger lawyers or more junior lawyers, not necessarily younger, working with you that need to be kept busy and fed and are dependent on you actually feeding them quality work to develop their careers. You really, at the level of being a partner or even aspiring to be a partner, there is an element of rainmaking or work generation that's required. So you have to actually think about, why should someone give me a piece of work? And there are a number of reasons why they might. And a lot of it is about, obviously, you need the skills, you need to have developed the expertise, but at the highest level, and certainly competing amongst the top firms in New Zealand, which is highly competitive, there are many lawyers who have similar skill sets and levels of expertise. So actually then you need to layer on top of that personality, just being a good person to deal with, because sometimes people will go to lawyers that they don't enjoy dealing with if they know that lawyer has the answer to their questions or is the attack dog that they want to perform a particular task. But most people like to deal with people that they actually enjoy dealing with. So it is about building those personal relationships. It's about building your brand in the market and actually having people go, that's the sort of thing I should talk to Jeremy Muir about. Or actually, even better, is for them to have a conversation with a colleague or a competitor or someone else in the business and have that person say, you want to do that sort of thing? The person you should talk to is Jeremy Muir, Luke Campbell, Ella Cleary. You really need to build up those things. And there are a lot of ways that you can do now, particularly if anyone follows me. I'm very active on LinkedIn, getting ideas across, engaging with other people. That's an easy way of sort of becoming known to people for your passions and your curiosities and your interests and your skills. And apart from that, it's being in the room for industry events and other things as well. To become a partner, if that's your goal, you need to persuade the other existing partners in the law firm, that making you a partner and therefore ultimately, depending on the structure, giving you a share in the profits of the overall business, is that you're going to raise everyone's profits, or at least not drop them. In order to vote you in, they need to be satisfied that you're going to bring a certain amount of work, bring a certain amount of leverage, and run a good solid ship. You're not going to get them in trouble, because obviously partnerships are joint and several liabilities, so there's a lot of trust in bringing in a new partner. That partner isn't going to get you sued. So there are a lot of skills, and particularly if you're trying to be made up as a partner internally, so within your firm, it's really about acting as a partner and growing into the role to the point where everyone says, he or she is already doing it. So let's give them the label and see what happens.
Yeah. You shared the story about Will, and I'm sure in your professional life, as you were working on these projects and building your practice, you received a lot of punches to the face and failures. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on how resilience plays into your success.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And working in a large firm, but equally, I imagine working in a small firm from different angles is definitely about having the resilience to shrug off the challenges as they come. And there are certainly real moments where I've gone, oh my God, did I just do that? Did I say that? Why didn't I actually tell this person that I was going to talk about them in an article or something like that? And most of those things I might lose a night's sleep over, but most of the bad stuff that you think about doesn't happen, it turns out. There's a lot of things that you will worry about for a short period, but actually, if you are able to get your own head around them, they tend to resolve themselves, or they can be fixed. But also just those, as you say, those other life challenges and things, you need the resilience to pick yourself up and carry on. You also need the support, the whānau, the other peer groups, work colleagues. All of those people are equally important in terms of actually helping you carry on.
I can only imagine from what you've shared with us already, being a partner at a large law firm is demanding. But what does a typical day for Jeremy look like today?
It starts with struggling out of bed because I'm more of a night owl than a sort of a leaping up in the morning person, although sometimes I will go and work out early in the morning irregularly, and sometimes I try to sort of cycle into work. So it's all about trying to find those opportunities. And then my day is really split between kind of the tyranny of email, which really is the biggest challenge to being and a healthy lifestyle certainly for me and a large commercial lawyer. Just the sheer volume of communication, hundreds of emails that I would get and need to deal with every day. And then it's about trying to switch off from that sort of very reactive mode into a proactive mode of carving out chunks of time to deal with hard issues or to supervise a particular piece of work. And then the other things that I do during the day are a mix of running the team, administrative things like making sure we bill people so that we can keep the lights on and pay the staff, all of those things. But I do things like this. If someone wants to talk to me or to have me come and talk about something that I'm passionate about, whether it's crypto, digital assets, I do a lot of non-paid for talking about stuff to people, or getting in the room with people who want to talk about policy or how the law is developing. And I've always, part of what has kept me interested in the job and in the role, and I think has been part of my success as a lawyer and a partner, has been trying not to operate on a zero-sum game of my job is to perform legal work that you will pay me for, and if you're talking to me then my clock is ticking and you're going to get a bill, to taking the approach of trying to put stuff out into the universe, a lot of it for free, and then wait for the karma to bring people back to actually then instruct me and the firm to do billable work. So there's a lot of entertaining, catching up with people, having coffee, talking at events, writing sort of reports, a bit of that, and then trying to fit the real sort of billable, solid work of creating a venture capital fund or something around that as well. So I tend to work late-ish, so it would be unusual if I'm out of the office before 7, sometimes later if I have an evening event, sometimes earlier, it depends. We also have a lot more flexibility post-COVID in terms of people working from home or taking calls or doing Zoom meetings in my car, not whilst driving with the video on or something like that, but safety first. So there's a real mix, and each day is different, which I guess is why I'm still here.
I'd love to talk more about your role in the firm now. Obviously, you mentioned you're opened up a new branch and you're co-leading the banking and financial services division now. How would you define what high performance is within your job?
High performance has a number of metrics. Some of them are exhaustively recorded numerically in a large law firm, and there are obviously things that we measure, such as, for a partner, work generated, work brought into the firm, which we measure in terms of billable hours recorded, and then we measure from that actual sort of dollars billed, and then we measure actual dollars paid, and those things hopefully line up, but they don't always. So as a partner, you're measured on both the work that you generate, the work that you supervise, the work that you personally perform, and also to encourage and ensure that work goes to the right person within the firm, work that is referred. But equally, the metrics need to recognise that I've done that to encourage me to do so. High performance is measured through a lot of those sort of hard statistics. And then there's a lot more intangible stuff of reputation. So if you get a reputation of being hard to work with, or heaven forbid, dishonest or tricky or going to screw you over for something else, then it's very hard to build back from that. So I was told very early on that as a lawyer, your reputation amongst your peers and your clients and within your firm and externally is your currency. It is the most important thing. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter how good you are on the other things. Nail all of those things to be successful. And just to layer on the side of that, obviously then there is, what are your personal goals and KPIs? Are you actually living a life that you are comfortable with? Or are you getting burnt out? And are you doing things outside the office that you want to do, as well as things that you want to do inside the office?
This episode of File Notes is proudly brought to you by VXT. VXT is the legal phone system. It's a cloud-based voice-over-IP phone system built specifically for law firms. VXT integrates with your practice management system to automatically record file notes and time entries against legal matters after every phone call. It even syncs your contacts so you know who's calling and what they're calling about before you answer the call. Find out more about VXT at vxt.co.nz/law.
We know that you're really passionate about FinTech, so I was wondering if maybe you could explain what that is for our listeners.
Yeah, so I'd been working for a while in sort of the funds area and also the financial services regulation area, because New Zealand was getting more and more regulation of all different types of financial services. And in the funds area, I'd always been passionate about venture capital and working with startups. And over a while, those two sort of streams of financial regulation and startups came together under the broad heading of FinTech, which became a popular thing for people to talk about. FinTech is really just the intersection of financial services and technology, or using technology to deliver financial services in sort of new and innovative ways. And to some extent that could be as simple as banks using bank apps and those sort of technologies. But it also is new businesses, new peer-to-peer lending platforms, new equity crowdfunding platforms, and then ultimately people like Sharesies, who are actually providing platforms to bring people into financial markets and investment that might not have always been able to easily get into it.
What do you think some of the legal implications of the growth of FinTech have been in New Zealand?
It's a really interesting area, and I have written some reports. I wrote a report for Treasury on global regulation of FinTech, and one of the things that we came across in that academics had written about was called the FinTech trilemma, which is that you can regulate innovation in financial services in a way which kind of looks after people or protects consumers. You can do it in a way which is straightforward and clear for businesses, and you can do it in a way which actually encourages innovation, but generally you only manage to hit 2 out of 3 of those things. It's an area where financial services are heavily regulated because it's consumer protection. People can lose their money, they can lose their savings. The rules don't necessarily make it easy for people intentionally to set up businesses or to operate in that space. So there's a lot of work trying to help people come up with, if they're a startup, a minimum viable product, an MVP that they can actually go to market with in an environment which is highly regulated. So it's a bit chicken and egg at that point.
The industry is growing at a really fast rate. Do you think that the current regulatory frameworks can keep up with that growth?
Yeah, it's a process of evolution. They need to evolve to keep up with it. And we have done good things. Like a lot of our financial regulation is now designed to be technologically agnostic. So it doesn't matter how you deliver financial advice. For example, the regime should be fit for purpose to work with robo-advice in the same way that it works with sitting opposite a human financial advisor in a room. So that a lot of that work is continually evolving. Because things change so fast, it is hard to regulate. And so I just co-authored a report on blockchain digital assets with academic Alex Sims that was published in the last couple of weeks. And a lot of that is really about the challenges of regulating a very fast-moving sector. Because there are certain things that you could do to regulate it, regimes that you could introduce, but by the time you actually design and implement the regime, that part of the sector may have changed beyond recognition, and so there's not much point doing that. You're better to focus on just trying to weed out bad actors and find other ways of educating people and providing consumer protection.
You mentioned FinTech is more focused on convenience of client experience rather than simply process, maybe in comparison to traditional banking. With that in mind, do you think that consumers are adequately protected while using FinTech services?
Yes and no, in that, yes, there are definite legal protections and things that people need to think about when designing and offering these services, but they do come with risks. And as you say, cyber and data breach issues are ongoing and continuous, and they're affecting both new technology and older generation technologies as well. The businesses that are just launching, because they're able to use the latest technology or design their systems from scratch, in some respects they may be safer than some of the older legacy brands that are using older forms of data storage or protecting them less carefully. But there are obviously exceptions on either side. So it's important for everyone in the markets to look after their customers and their customers' data.
Because this is an area of law that's expanding a lot, or do you think it's really important that lawyers are educating themselves about things like financial services?
Yeah, it is. And the universities are, to some degrees, probably paying a bit of catch-up themselves, and we're trying to contribute to that. I'm offering at Auckland University this year a sort of masterclass series on financial services, which is partly self-serving in that it's about sort of trying to tell people at the universities this is what financial services and FinTech lawyers do or can do to encourage people to come and want to work for us. But equally, it's recognising that this is an area that should be taught, and that young lawyers who may want to work in the space should be exposed to. And you don't necessarily get it it falls between some of the other core areas like company law or human rights law or employment law. It's really quite a niche, but a very important one, because financial services is everywhere. It's how we interact and buy stuff, pay for stuff, save stuff. So it's pretty fundamental.
Definitely. When we first met, you shared the story of how you'd worked with Sharesies, which today is one of the most successful fintech startups or startup companies in general in New Zealand and even internationally. I understand you met the team there pretty early on, and you've worked with them through at various stages of their journey. Could you tell us about what that was like?
Yeah, look, I love Sharesies. Our team loves Sharesies. We've worked with them for a long time, and it's been a very rewarding relationship for us in terms of both work but also learning, and actually just really satisfying to see them grow. So I got a call from some of the team within the first few days of their formation as they were working away in an incubator or an FinTech accelerator where the business was being put together. And luckily I was able to sort of help them and tell them that actually, if you do it like this, the service you're fundamentally providing is what we call custody. That's one of the lighter regulated parts of the industry in New Zealand. And then as they've evolved and as they've added more services, so added trading in New Zealand shares, Australian shares, US shares, becoming an accredited NZX market participant, these are all extra layers of compliance and legal obligation that they've had to deal with. And we've helped them build some of their processes and capacity. The second lawyer they hired came out of my team and did a great job for them before going overseas. And now most recently we've been working with them on their new and innovative KiwiSaver product. It's also great and satisfying to be able to work for clients who are really building something a bit different. They're a certified B Corp, they have great social impact goals and aspirations, they do good things for diversity, provide a great working environment for their people. We're watching and learning as well as providing legal services to them.
In a nutshell, could you maybe explain what crypto is and how you help startups and businesses understand it from a legal perspective?
Yeah, sure. We've launched our own sort of set of podcasts at Minter Ellison where I've done a couple of Tokens of Our Affection podcasts where I explain some of this stuff. But in a nutshell, crypto derives from Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an electronic form of money, the ownership of which is recorded on a distributed ledger, a blockchain. And effectively what that means is that rather than having a single entity who controls the records and decides who owns which Bitcoin or is updating things when it's recorded, that is done on a decentralized manner by computers all around the world who are joining into the process. And then what has evolved from that is, as you can have Bitcoin, you can have other forms of digital token. And those tokens could be either fungible, like coins or currencies, or non-fungible, NFTs, which actually might represent real-world assets or might be tradable digital assets. Sorry, there's a lot of jargon in there, but basically it's just another set of technological tools to allow people to interact, to move value from A to B, and to do things in a sort of digital native way, which is why that we're backing it, because in 5-10 years we might not be talking about these things with their awkward labels and acronyms. It'll just be part of the plumbing of the digital world that we live in.
Over the past few years, there was this massive hype and attention directed to crypto and NFTs and the metaverse more broadly. I'm probably someone that you could consider a crypto skeptic. I know that there are certain use cases where tools like blockchain make a lot of sense, and there are definitely a lot of use cases where they don't make any sense. And then there are some people out there in the world who would try to communicate that crypto and blockchain is going to be everywhere. And so my question for you is, what's your best guess as to where the most enduring value will come from in this space?
Yeah, so the pithy story for me is that you have the hype cycle where any form of new technology has its peaks of interest and then falls down again. What's happened with crypto is that those peaks have been associated with people finding ways to monetize them in a way that makes a lot of money very quickly, which has led to a lot of people piling in, the creation of sort of hyper-speculative bubbles, along with bad actors who've realized that this is an easy way to make money. And that has been a whole bunch of fireworks going off, distracting from the core use cases. So what those core use cases, I think, are around just interactions in the next version of the internet where you actually want people to be able to own, control, transfer, monetize aspects of their digital existence. So whether it's owning digital items, whether it is actually creating digital packets of information and data. So there are several startups and companies around the world and in New Zealand working on things like tokenizing packets of information which record social impacts. So, green impacts that are created by planting trees on land, those sort of things. And then actually creating sort of sub-markets around those packets of information for people who need to actually make claims based on actual environmental impacts or social impacts. So all of those sort of things are good cases where you can use that concept of trustless distributed ledgers to both record information in a immutable time-stamped way, to move it from A to B, to actually create markets around it. And you're right to be cynical or skeptical, because a lot of the behaviours of people who have been trying to make money fast on the edge of this are really not helping the overall case. And there has been a very humorous sort of, what's the answer to any question, blockchain? And clearly that's not right either.
Yeah, awesome. So I imagine when you were diving into this area, you've probably faced a lot of skepticism from colleagues as well. How did you navigate working with stakeholders at Minterellis and Watts as you were starting out?
Success is the best way to negotiate any of that sort of skepticism or cynicism. Once you could demonstrate that actually we had clients who were successful in that space, who were paying our bills, obviously it then moves to more, he's talking about the crypto again, rather than you really shouldn't be doing that. It's worked well because we've built a successful practice in that space. And it's not by no means the only thing that I do, but it is a nice adjunct to the other FinTech or traditional finance, TradFi, if you like, parts of the practice.
A little bit of a different question here. The government here in New Zealand just announced a policy to make financial literacy compulsory part of the curriculum in schools. What do you think about this move and how it might affect the future of New Zealand?
I think it's a really good thing. I look back at my education both at school and outside of school and realise that I got to being a grown-up and then actually being a financial services lawyer, having very little sort of basic information taught to me. Maybe because I didn't study even economics or business or anything at school or even at university, maybe that's why, but I think there is a basic level of financial literacy that could be easily taught and will be incredibly helpful to people. There is no easy path now to just get a job, get a mortgage, lead a relatively easy life financially. You have to be a bit more savvy now in terms of understanding the ways of earning, saving, buying assets, paying for it. Because of house prices, all of those other things, people are going to need to do things other than just earn a salary, put it in the bank, get a mortgage. I think it should be compulsory to learn the basics, because I think everyone benefits from it and it will make people make better decisions over time.
Awesome. Just to finish things off, got a bit of a quick fire round. So I'm going to share some short statements with you and I want you to give us your immediate thoughts in just 1 or 2 sentences.
I'm sure this will be very psychologically revealing, so I'll try not to be psychologically revealed.
Alrighty. So what do others not know that you know to be true?
Really, that a lot of the answers are in jazz.
Fantastic. What do people not understand about law that you wish they did?
That it is fundamentally a people business rather than a dry sort of argument-based, court-based process.
I couldn't agree more. What single element would you want to change about the legal industry today?
I think certainly in my business, I alluded to it before, email. We just need less sort of communication flying around and more sort of effective communication, and also to slow things down so that people can have a good work-home balance, but also focus on one issue at a time.
What's the most painful lesson you've learned that you're pleased to have learned?
Really that personally I work better when I work with others and can rely on others to fill in the gaps of the things that I don't do well, whether that's taking notes in meetings or actually pushing for delivery of work. A team works better than an individual.
What is the future of financial services technology?
I think the future depends on digital identity being resolved to a degree where a lot of the friction in processes disappears and things can happen almost seamlessly and automatically and intuitively because of the technology allowing things to happen instantly under the hood, so that we're not talking about whether it's crypto or whether it's more traditional types of technology. These things just happen because we want them to happen, and it's less about the technology and more about just the customer experience.
Cool. Final thing from me, and you can take it in a lot of different directions. Does it get easier over time?
Yes, I think so. I'm sure that's not the case for everybody, but I do think certainly as you build a career, if we want to take it that way, when you get to the stage where you can have a certain degree of autonomy over your time and can make decisions as to what's important rather than simply delivering on other people's important things, then I think that is helpful for your own sort of mental health.
So I really appreciate you taking the time to catch up with Ella and I today, Jeremy. I know I've learned a lot from this episode. As we wrap up, what are some of the things that you're working on that you would like people to check out?
Definitely check out the Minter Allison Rudd Watts Tech Suite. It's Tech Suite podcasts, which you can find in most podcast services. We're quite pleased with those, and we're doing them in the way you are, although we're only doing audio, not video, more in the form of conversations rather than prepared readings from news alerts. So we're quite pleased with that. I'm obviously quite interested to see what happens with the crypto report that we had released through the Finance and Expenditure Committee of the New Zealand Parliament in the last couple of weeks, because that proposes some quite cool things like crypto FinTech sandboxes and real encouragement for innovation, that it will be interesting to see what the government and other players pick up and run with from there, and I'm keen to keep moving things along. Those are things that I'm thinking about at the moment. But if you follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll get a fair feel for things that are top of my brain at any particular time.
Awesome.